So when you're working with Illustrator files, a lot of times you need to zoom in to see the details or zoom out to see the entire composite. So we're going to explore different ways to set up your zoom, your rulers, your grids, so that you'll be able to better manage your artwork and view it. Here we go. Okay, so I've got this file opened and I want to get started with some options for zooming. Well, one way to do that is to use the view menu, and you have lots of features in here for viewing your document, including some different zoom and magnification settings right here. So one option is to zoom in, zoom out, and there's actually a great keyboard shortcut, Control plus and Control minus. And I'm going to click on the zoom in and you'll see how it gets bigger. And I'm just going to hold down my Control and tap the plus key, which technically I guess is the equal key, but you get the idea. And here's the minus. And this works in other Adobe products as well, including Acrobat, which is great. And so that's a zoom in, zoom out. And down below I actually have on the status bar a different magnification that I could use to quickly jump to these. And you can see the largest you can get to is 6400. That's a little big, but you know, there could be some different files where that could be appropriate. And again, with the 3.1, you know, that's kind of small, but again, depending on the file you have, that could be more appropriate. I'm going to go ahead and change this here to 100. And this is going to give me a close representation of 100% when it prints. But based on your monitor resolution, it could be a little different than what you might think. Now, I'm going to also use some tools that I have here. I've got the hand tool and the zoom tool. The zoom tool is very similar to what we have with our zoom in, zoom out. I can actually just click to zoom in, but I get some more control over where I'm clicking. I'm just scrolling up a little bit here and I can click. I can also hold down the Alt key and you can see how that plus in the zoom goes the opposite direction, and I can go smaller. Another nice thing about this is that I can click and drag around an area and zoom in just to that area, or hold down Alt and kind of go back out. And if you double click on the zoom tool, if you double click on it, it takes you to 100%. Now the hand tool is handy because the hand tool allows you to scroll through. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll through this document. So if your magnification, if your zoom is large or to a point where you can't see the entire artwork, then you might want to scroll or pan through. And if you double click on the hand tool, it takes you to what's called a fit in window. And actually, let's go back here to the view menu. Here's this fit artboard in window, and this keyboard shortcut Control 0 is very, very handy. It's a great one to learn. Even if you're not someone who uses a lot of keyboard shortcuts, I'd recommend this one, because as you're zooming in, and I'll go ahead and change here my zoom tool, zoom a little bit, I can just do my Control 0 and I can quickly fit this to the window. I'm going to go over here to this one with logos, Control 0, and it fits to the window. There was another one in here called Fit Artboard in Window, and Fit All in Window. And you can see that keyboard shortcut, Control Alt 0. And if you have multiple artboards, it's going to show you everything on your page, not just the one artboard that you happen to be looking at. So you could do your Control 0 or Control Alt 0. And these are also handy because in other Adobe products like Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, Acrobat, you're going to use these same keyboard shortcuts. Now, another keyboard shortcut that I really, really like with the zoom is actually a combination of the mouse and the keyboard. And the reason I like it is because a lot of times I'm working on something like, let's say I have my text selected and I want to do some editing with text, but I can't quite make out the text, and so it'd be easier to zoom in. Well, instead of switching tools, I'm going to hold down my Control and Space bar. So Control and Space bar temporarily gives me my magnifying glass. If I let go of Control and Space, I go right back to the tool that I had previously selected, in this case the Type tool. I'm going to go ahead and Control Space, click and drag around an area, marquee around that area, and then I can zoom right in, and as soon as I let go of Control and Space, then I'm back with my Type tool and I can start working on some information if I want to make some edits, for example. And I can also do my Control Space Alt, but to tell you the truth, instead of all that stuff, I'm just going to do Control 0. Remember, that was the shortcut to fit artboard in window. So Control Space to quickly zoom into an area, and Control 0 to go back and fit the entire artboard back in the screen. And the fit artboard and screen will vary depending on the monitor resolution and also how much space you have in your artboard. You can actually have slightly different versions when you're changing that. Now you also have some options with your view of doing something like view outline. I'm going to scroll up here a little bit, view outline, and that was Control Y, but it gives you a wireframe. And instead of seeing all the objects and being cluttered with all the different graphics and gradients and blends, etc., you can quickly do this view outline or preview, and it's actually a toggle between the two. And it's also good to know that because Control Y is a keyboard shortcut that's very common in other products like Microsoft. And so a lot of times you might be pressing the Control Y and you're thinking, what just happened? Did I break it? No, you're just switching between the preview mode and the outline mode. It's just a toggle back and forth. Use also in your view menu, you can do things like overprint preview or pixel preview. This is helpful if you want to see some ideas of how it's going to look when it prints. And it gives you some options with the color blending. Pixel preview gives some better ideas of how it's going to be rendered if this is intended for a web environment. And you can even check those so neither of them are available. And you have some options for looking with the color, some options with the print tiling and the artboards, etc. and the edges. I'm going to go ahead and choose hide edges. And what hide edges does is it actually only shows me objects when they're selected. But if I go back in here and I turn those options to show edges, and there's that Control H, then it's easier for me to see some of these edges when they're selected even when they're not selected. Okay, so we've got those hide edges, hide artboards, and then let's take a closer look at rulers. This option has the rulers turned on, and it's actually Control R to turn them on and off. There's my rulers. Control R, turn them on and off. And I can actually see the measurements that are out here on the side. I could right click to change the measurements, or I could go into Edit, Preferences, Units, and I can change the measurements here. By default, a lot of times they're going to be in points or picas, and you may want to set this up into inches or something else. Okay, and you can also view your grid. Let me scroll down a little bit here. There's an option to show grid. Now that's not the same as perspective grid, that's a whole different animal, but let's go ahead and choose show grid. And this helps when you're trying to line something up and have a little bit more perspective, but the grid right here has its own preferences, and so if you're going to use the grid, it's probably a good idea to take advantage of the preferences. So here's guide and grid. And first of all, you can control what the grid's going to be set up as. So every 1 inch, every 8 inches. That's going to be handy because I'm using inches as my measurement as opposed to points. But I could actually put in every ½ inch, and subdivisions are 4, for example. I could also change the color if I wanted to. So right now it's light gray. If I want to pick something else that might make it easier to see, like here is green. And you can have some different styles as well. And then this is all for the grid. We also have some options for the guides themselves. Click on OK. But you can see how it turns that green color and the grid changed. I'm going to go back to my preferences, guides and grids, and I'm just going to reset that back to the defaults, which is light gray, every 1, every 8. You also notice again for the color guides it has cyan. This document actually has 2 guides visible. And the way you create a guide is you take the ruler and you just pull it out and you can create a guide. And that's handy if you want to have some options to delineate different areas in your document. The guides do not print, nor does the grid. They're just there to help you lay things out. And when you're moving things around, it will allow you to snap things to the guide. Now part of that actually is based on, in your view menu, do you have this feature called snap to grid, snap to point. Here we have our guides as well. So part of that has to do with the snap features. If I choose snap to grid, it also means that I can take advantage of the grid by having items jump and snap in. It also means sometimes you want a more fluid environment and you don't want it to be snapping, so you need to turn that off in order to be able to move this around without necessarily being constrained by the grid. So it really depends on what you want. I can go back here to hide grid. And if I want to remove this guide, I can actually click on it and just delete it. So it's behaving like an object, which is a little interesting here. It's behaving like an object, but it's not going to print. Now these items in here too also have features called screen modes, and right now we're in a default screen mode normal, but we can switch to full screen mode, and we can also switch to full screen mode with menu bar and full screen mode without the menu bar. And if you get in this mode, you might think, how do I get out? You can press escape, or you can use the F key right here. You'll see the F key actually changes your screen mode. So if I press the F key a couple times, I can move in. So that's handy. A lot of times I like this too because sometimes people press the F key and they get into this mode without realizing it. Also incidentally, when you use the tab key, most of the time with the tab key it's going to hide your panels. If you press the tab key they come back again. But sometimes that can be a little strange to people and they're trying to figure out like what just happened. The tab key does act like a regular tab key when you are using the type tool, but when you have all the other tools available, you can get some different results in here. One other thing about these grids and guides is that you can create your own grids and guides based on objects. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I've got this box in here and I want to turn that into grids and guides. If I go ahead to my view menu, I can come here to guides and I can actually make guides. Oh, I can, you know what, I need to use a box first. So let me go ahead and create a box. And let's say I decided this was the size that I wanted for my spine. That would be great. I'll go in view, make guides, and it turned those into guides for me that I can use for now lining things up. And you can see how it has those blue lines, so they're not going to print, but it's easier for it to move around. And it's not going across the whole artboard anymore as well, or the whole work area anymore as well. So we have our different views, we've got rulers, we've got different zoom options, and it allows us to better interact with our artwork. Okay, so now it's time for a pop quiz. What is the keyboard shortcut for switching between preview mode and outline mode? A, Control-0, B, Control-M, C, Control-P, D, Control-Y. The answer is D, Control-Y, and that allows you to switch to the outline mode to see a wireframe or back to the preview mode to actually see the artwork.